Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, happy spring in Seattle, everybody. The warm and beautiful May we're having is certainly making up for the cold and gloomy April we suffered through. But it's great to have blue skies in the city of Seattle, and downtown has been bustling of late with Amazon's return to office as of May 1. We've had more people working downtown the first 3 weeks of May than any one period since the start of the pandemic. I was over in their offices just yesterday and over around the Spheres, and the public spaces were full, and the patios and bars and cafes were full. It felt great. So great momentum in downtown as we welcome more office workers back, and we've got the cruise season going and conventions taking place, and leisure travelers finding their way to Seattle as well. So terrific momentum, and all the things we want to be going up and to the right. All those data points we're tracking, whether it's visitors or hotel occupancy or residents or workers back in their offices downtown, they are all going up and to the right. So plenty of work ahead, but we're moving in the right direction. Well, I want to welcome you to our latest episode where I have the great pleasure of sitting down with Seattle City Attorney Ann Davison. Ann took office in January of 2022. Prior to taking office, she was an attorney in private practice for a number of years, a lecturer at the University of Washington. She worked in the front office of the Seattle Supersonics. She's a graduate of Baylor University, where she played soccer for the school, got her law degree from Willamette down in Salem. She's on the board of the Seattle Youth Soccer Association and also has coached soccer. We discuss her first year in office, the crisis around drugs in our city, and some recent legislation that she has proposed with council members Alex Peterson and Sarah Nelson to make it a gross misdemeanor in the city of Seattle to publicly use drugs. We also discuss her efforts to recenter the voice of crime victims in our city when it comes to public safety challenges and some of the cases that are coming across her desk, and the challenges around individuals who are deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial, and the shortcomings in our system currently in addressing their needs. And we also discuss some lighter topics: her first job, how she got to Seattle, and of course, our standard question of her itinerary for her perfect Saturday in the city of Seattle. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Seattle City Attorney Ann Davison. Well, thank you for making time for this. We just jump in. This is how we roll.
We're with it. I've made Scrappy MacGyver awards in my office.
Yeah.
It's a real deal. We gave out the first 3 this past year.
Oh, yeah? To your staff?
Yeah. One in each division, Scrappy MacGyver.
What are they
which is
rewarding?
Are you old enough to know the show MacGyver?
Of course.
Okay. I mean, it's about resourcefulness, right? Making stuff work with what you got, right? So
And you know the MacGruber version sketch of that on SNL? I like that one. I loved MacGyver.
Yeah, so we did that. So that's why we just dive in, because we have to make it go.
Yeah,
and make it function,
you have to roll.
Work with what you have and still get the problem solved.
Yeah. Seeing you just now reminds me I have a parking ticket to pay. Yeah, sorry, that just came into my head.
I try to avoid them. As lawyers, we tend to be rule followers, so we tend to.
It's gotten off my windshield, but it's in the center console, like under something.
Just don't miss it.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I've been driving it around
don't.
the city for the last week and a half. I have 5 more days, I think, before I need to deal with it, before I hear from you.
Not with it on the windshield, right?
No, that's what I mean.
I guess then it probably deters getting other ones.
Have you done that?
If they think, no, but you just made me think that maybe
I haven't either.
It says you've already gotten one, and maybe you don't get a new one. I don't know.
In my early 20s, I did that. Anyway, so I wanted to start with, so you're almost a year and a half into.
Year and a quarter.
Yeah, a year and a quarter. I don't want to rush it into your role here. And I always am curious for folks who decide to run for office, whether there was a moment, an event, a conversation that was sort of the trigger that catalyzed it, where you said, oh, I'm doing this. Was there some influential event or period or person that made you decide to file for the city attorney?
For this specific race?
Yeah.
Since I've did other things similar.
For this
because
one.
It's all.
How did the decision come to be?
I've been talking about the same issues, everything I've done since I decided to get politically involved. It's always been the same issues, and I've talked about them in the same way, with the same focus of trying to get some improvement on it. But for this race specifically, it literally was, sadly, this won't be a very nice sounding conversation for you, but it was sadly at the deathbed of my birth mother the day before filing, and nobody had entered the race. And I was asking around, isn't anybody going to go? That's the impact seat. You don't really need to do anything else but change that one seat, because that will actually have a cascading impact in how public safety is run. It's similar to changing where you position one chair in a room. By changing that, you change the traffic pattern around you. And nobody was willing to do it. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. Like, does nobody else see this? That's the impact seat. And I sat moments after my birth mother passed away, and my adoptive mother down in Texas was also in ICU at the time. So the two women as to why I have my capabilities and why I'm here and exist were near the end of their life. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. Someone else surely has the time to do this besides me. This is not convenient. But I just knew when the chaplain came into that hospice room, and I said, I just have this decision that's tomorrow, and I can't stop thinking about it. And she said, well, what would she tell you to do? And
so you weren't able to have a conversation with your birth mother at that point? Yeah.
No. And I just knew, right? Like, because she asked me, how do you feel if you don't do it? And I'm like, sick to my stomach. So I'm like, I just know it's the right thing to do. It's clearly the right thing for the city, even though it was personally inconvenient and not comfortable. So I'm immensely thankful that I just have the makeup to have the stamina and the education and the upbringing that I had to where I have the capabilities to do this, and thankful that I don't really back down to a lot of things. So,
well, we're grateful you committed to public service.
Yeah,
not a deep bench there in this day and age of people are willing to put themselves out there to do it.
That's right. And I really do encourage people everywhere I go. I say it's really not so bad. It's actually really an enjoyable experience. I see why people don't want to do it. Regular people that are problem solvers that just want to see stuff get handled. But we really do need those people to be in government, particularly at the local level. That's really the most impactful to our daily lives. And I just say, there's all kinds of circumstances and excuses to not do it. But that's why I share that personal story about me. I lost my adopted mother less than a month into office last year. So it really was bookends at the start of the campaign and then taking office, losing both of them. But again, as a mother, as raising my children here, it's exactly the reason why it's important for me to do it and use the skill set that I have that I see was lacking in leadership here in the city. And so encourage people to run for office, because it really is one way you can be impactful and make a difference instead of just complaining or talking about it or moving away.
Who was the first person you talked to or you called after you made that decision to run? Do you remember?
Who did I call? Boy. I actually don't remember, because I was going to pick up my kids. I mean, it was literally the filing deadline was like at 4 o'clock.
You had a few things on your mind.
I did it at 3:50. Yeah. And I was like, if you do it now, you got to do it now, because it closes in 10 minutes.
On the filing deadline.
On filing deadline day.
Wow.
And it really was that. And nobody else was in. Nobody else was visible on the website as running.
Yeah.
And I submitted, it closed, and then there was an additional name after that.
Yep.
And so it just, again, because I had called people and said, what do you think about this in the days before? And everyone was like, no. Don't do that. Don't do that. No. Sit back and watch. I'm like, I'm not doing this to be just some elected person. I'm doing this because this position touches the topics that I've been talking about now for years. And it's clear to me, even someone who doesn't work in this industry, quote unquote industry, that this is the impact seat. I'm just going to, debunk all these theories that all these people had said don't do it. It's not
because you can't win, or else, or because it would be miserable.
Yeah, well, no, because what kind of strategy is that? Like they're just like, no, all these. This is not. Sit back, watch where people, all these things. Because it sounded like they thought my goal was just to get elected. I'm like, the process has value, right? The process of campaigning and connecting with people and letting people feel heard by those they put in places to make decisions on these big systems is important. And that, to me, was so powerful and gave me energy to where I was able to have the stamina, did not tire me. That's why I say, please go run for office, because you get so much appreciation.
So what was the state of the office that you walked into in January of 2022, without asking you to dump on your predecessor? I mean, you can do whatever you want, I guess, but what did you walk?
Yeah, I'm here to talk.
What did you walk into?
I mean, some of it was cavernous, right? A lot of people had exited after the primary because they weren't sure who was going to be taking over. And it's an office of about 200 people, civil division, so civil division lawyers and professional support staff, criminal division of prosecutors and professional support staff, and an administrative division of our human resources and tech and accounting people. And people are like, wow, we don't know who's going to be here. Maybe we should go ahead and jump ship because it's better to have a job that you think you know who's in charge instead of wondering. So a lot of it, and the people who stayed maybe weren't so sure about me. You know, they're like, I don't know who this person is, out of nowhere. Now all of a sudden she's going to be our boss. So I took the time to meet everybody in the office in my transition. To me, that's, again, the way you change a culture of an office, the culture that has a mission focus, and the mission now is changing, because to me it is about recentering the victims in the public safety dialogue, is you have to make sure those people know you as the leader and why they matter, why they and their job, as hidden as they might think it is actually important to me, because otherwise I cannot produce the work product that I'm trying to produce on behalf of the people of Seattle. So that's what I walked into, with a lot of surprise, where people were wondering, like, why is she meeting all of us? What does she want to know? And it really was just to talk, right?
You came in with curiosity.
Just as how do you like the hybrid? At the time we were all remote. How do you like the remote? What would you like to have for a work environment? It's just, we're recreating things. So let's talk about it. Again, similar to how I campaigned, which is, I'm not going to have all the answers, and I certainly don't need to have everything my way. The answer to me is always in the blend. And so if you don't get the information, you can't create any kind of a blend. That's why I always get like chocolate and vanilla swirl whenever I go somewhere, right? Because it's always better to have a little bit of a little bit of everything. It gives you, good balance. You're not going to get tired of one thing or the other.
How would you summarize your accomplishments and areas of focus in the first year?
It has been to overhaul the criminal division, right?
Walked in with
no criminal chief.
No criminal chief, and a big pile of cases that hadn't been
5,000 criminal cases that had been referred from Seattle Police Department. And when we say criminal case referral, it means it was a police report sent over that we were then to review and decide whether or not it met evidentiary standards to file charges. And if so, were we going to charge in the traditional way? We're going to put it to an alternative, or was there not enough evidentiary there? And we were going to dismiss it. Those were sitting and waiting
for a decision,
decision
from your office.
And some had expired, past the statute of limitations, so were no longer prosecutable. Some were close to that time, so would not be successful even if we were. And that message was to victims, well, what happened to you didn't really matter enough for us to even get our process organized to be able to respond to that criminal activity that occurred to you. Sorry, suck it up. And that's just not okay. That's not why we built that system and invested in our system. So it was to hire a criminal chief, which I'm thrilled having Natalie Walton Anderson as, she's also the first woman criminal chief there. Another mother, just a stalwart of work ethic and prosecutorial experience and leadership. She's just phenomenal. So could not do this without her. And so it has been to change the internal processes, again, focus on what we can control within our own authority and power, because it's always more tempting to clean out somebody else's closet, but you need to make sure yours is in order. And so that's what we focused on when I started.
So one of the initiatives in your first year was the High Utilizer Initiative. What is it for those who aren't familiar, and how's it going? So
first, I'll start with the name. It's called High Utilizer because I don't want to call somebody an offender. people identify with nouns. So let's talk about what is the current circumstances. Right now, it's people that are utilizing our systems frequently. And in this space, it is about the public safety system. So that is police resources, that is prosecutorial resources, that is the jail beds that we contract with King County for. It is diversionary things. It is alternatives. It is our courts. It's all that. So again, it starts, though, with data. And we wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't have data. And there was not data available prior to my arrival.
So you couldn't see
there was data there, but
interaction with all these systems, with police, with the courts, with your office.
Yes. And it was there. We have like a 30-year-old criminal case system, right? We live in Tech Town. We have pretty much one of the oldest ones around. It is supposed to be, my predecessor started in the last couple of years to get a new one. So it is far enough down the tracks that I'm having to let that finish its course, but we're still waiting for that. Meanwhile, we can't just wait on the data. We need to know it. So thankfully, my data team of one is extremely smart and was able to cull those systems and provide that visual for us and the public. And again, it's really impactful because then the policy decisions become so apparent, and it's not difficult to see what the right thing to do is. So when we did that to see who we had in our system that was based on, they had 12 or more referrals to our office from Seattle Police Department, at least one in the past 8 months when we started the initiative. And that created 118 individuals responsible for 2,400 police referrals. And when I say a referral, that is not just one crime necessarily. A police report could have 5 crimes, right? 8 crimes, 2 crimes. So we don't measure it by crimes because what they have on the police report could be possible crimes. We then decide whether or not those, again, are prosecutable. So it may send it over with 10, maybe we charge 3 or 4 or something like that. So the number of referrals, 118 responsible for 2,400 referrals. That is a small number of people to slow down the systems enough.
It's high utilization.
High utilization of our systems. Let's figure out what's happening for those people so we are not spinning our wheels, literally and figuratively, with our systems responses for those people, and then realizing within that there are repeat victims, many of which are business owners, large and small, in the form of retail theft, for example. And so that's really the smart way to do it, especially when your number of officers is lower than we ideally would have. That means you need to be smarter. And that's the scrappy MacGyver I talked about earlier. We have to be resourceful with what we do have. The answer is not going to always be more money to do it and more people to do it. It means do it smarter.
And that helped you make some decisions on what you do with this backlog of 5,000 cases, right? You sort of prioritized the staff you do have, and you hired a bunch to fill, I know, a number of open positions. Did you focus them on these high utilizers then? And then there were some cases you had to sort of set aside for a variety of reasons. Did it help you kind of prioritize given the backlog that you were dealing with?
Well, what we did was with the backlog cases, if there were some in that backlog that involved those people that were meeting that criteria, we collected those within that backlog to bring them into real time, because what we're needing to say to those people who thought it was okay to behave in this way in our city with 20, because many of them had 20, 30, 40 referrals from Seattle Police. And that doesn't mean that every time it was something that should be prosecuted, but it means that's a lot of frequent contacts, and we need to be looking at why is this happening so much for these people, and what can we do from a systemic response. And sometimes it's appropriate for us to be involved, and sometimes another system should have been acting. And frankly, lots of other systems should have acted long before they got to the point where we're now having to intervene. But we are here and we need to do it. So it created a way to take those out of the backlog that would reduce some of it. We created a hierarchy of how we prioritize and what we do within the backlog, doing a one-time sad decision of having to do a large decline in that, because otherwise we can't instill real-time accountability, which is the goal of what we're trying to do with current referrals. And so again, using the Highlighted Initiative criteria list that creates for us where we need to be saying a different social message to criminal activity that's happening. Now we're saying, we see what you're doing, and we're going to be responding differently than what you've been accustomed to.
There's an intervention. You wrote an op-ed, I think in February, with King County prosecuting attorney Lisa Mannion about competency and individuals with mental health issues that have been deemed incompetent to stand trial, and sort of what we're doing to address their situation, their needs, but also their crimes currently. I think that was sort of aimed at the state and the Department of Social and Health Services and maybe the state legislature around additional resource needs to deal with their competency and have referrals to Western State, and to ensure they don't just sort of end up back on the street or spend months and months or beyond in a jail cell without treatment.
Yeah. I'm glad you read the op-ed.
What's that?
I'm glad you read the op-ed.
Yes, I did. It was very well written. What's the current state? Did we see any movement from the legislature around more funding? Have things improved? Have you gotten better signals from Department of Social and Health Services or others, or are we still in kind of the general same situation that prompted you to write the op-ed?
Well, it's a super.
And maybe help people understand how this works today, and what is broken for those who didn't see the op-ed.
Yeah.
But go read it. Seattle Times, right?
It is in Seattle Times. Appreciate that, because it really, I do want to focus on everyday language for everyday people to understand the questions that I had as an everyday person, member of the general public, trying to figure out what is not working, that I'm now completely focused and concentrating on all these complex problems in our society here that I never really thought about when I lived in Seattle as a single woman and would walk down to the Crocodile and go to a show, from Capitol Hill. It's so to understand where we're at, there's two things. First, there would be an answer about the bigger system when it comes to felony issues, but I don't handle that. So making sure the listeners understand, I only handle misdemeanor crimes that happen in the city of Seattle.
Which I think I've heard you say is 80% of all crime in the city. It's about 80% of all crime.
So sadly, if you end up being the victim of a crime, it's likely you will be the victim of a misdemeanor crime. So when people want to talk to you about, it's low-level crimes, they don't matter. Well, actually they do, because most victims are the victim of a misdemeanor crime. And one of the focuses I have for long-term is if you are the victim, if you are a stranger, meaning you don't know the person, you're not in an intimate relationship, for example, stranger, victim of a misdemeanor in Washington State, you have less substantive rights as a crime victim than other victims, felony victims, domestic violence victims. The substantive rights of a crime victim hinge on the classification of the crime. So this is actually why this is really important, and why it should matter to your listeners, is because if you are walking and you are the victim of someone you don't know who randomly assaults you on the street, you are the victim of a misdemeanor assault, likely, right? Because if it's you're not greatly harmed, it then would be a felony. But if that happens and you don't know the person, right? So that's a stranger on stranger misdemeanor assault, and that will come to my office. And if that person, the process would be that person is, if it's charged and sent to me, we then would review that. And if the defense counsel says, we think this person is incompetent, we want that person evaluated, then that process happens as it should, rightly so, happen. If that person is found to be incompetent and unable to participate in their defense, we can ask for what's called restoration through the Western State Hospital. But in 2019, our state legislature deprioritized misdemeanor restoration. And so what they said was, we do not want to focus on that from a budgetary standpoint or from an operational standpoint. So now put yourself back in, you're the person walking down the street that randomly was, shoved or something by somebody on the sidewalk. You're a crime victim, and there's really not going to be much I can do, because if that person is incompetent, we will not be successful in having them have mental services at Western State Hospital to get them restored, to then understand that they should be acting differently when they're in
that's because the
public.
state has said, well, let's prioritize that for those committing felonies in lieu
for those
of
committing
misdemeanors.
felonies. But even then, it's hard for people to get all the restoration that is needed for the felony level. And again, with the way the system's currently working, is sometimes there's what should be probably a felony because it meets the description in the statute, but for a variety of reasons, maybe the King County prosecutor doesn't accept it as that and declines it. And when we say it rolls downhill, we are the bottom of the hill. It comes a misdemeanor, likely could be a felony, but they're not going to pursue it, I then am unable to even help that person whatsoever, that person who's found incompetent, because the more likely scenario of them getting help, getting their mental stability restored is at the felony level. That's how the system's created to work. So when someone wants to be what looks like kinder, maybe, from a criminal justice system, and let's not charge a felony. I'm not saying this is what the county prosecutor does, but mentally, when everyday people think about it, well, I wouldn't want that to be a felony. That system is set up to provide the most likely help for that person with the felony. So when it is defelonized and comes a misdemeanor, I am completely unable to get that person restored. And the goal for restoration is to get somebody stabilized so they can understand what's happening with them, and then for further treatment. That's always the goal.
And to go through trial.
Yeah. And then hopefully they understand that the treatment route for them, whether it's for mental illness or a substance use disorder, those are the goals where we can help get them back to being themselves fully.
And I would guess that somebody who's out shoving somebody on the sidewalk for whatever reason isn't thinking, I'm going to commit a misdemeanor instead of a felony, right? So we've sort of categorized folks in a category that probably has loose boundaries. And
That's
the next
very
time
right.
they're potentially out, maybe it is a felony, but so
That's right.
we're ignoring and not intervening with a population of people that are clearly kind of crying out for help.
We're waiting unless and until they commit a more serious crime to actually say, now we'll pay attention to you. Now we will make our systems work to help you, to actually help there not be another victim. But anybody before that, I guess the system is saying they sadly were not as important. But again, when you're looking at if that action occurred because somebody was on, let's say, meth, which is so heavily used at the moment, which is directly toxic to the human brain, we don't have a way to block it like we do for some of the opioids. That person, I talk with Dr. Rick Reese, who heads up the addictions department at UW School of Medicine and at Harborview. And so this is when I talk about this, it's because I talk with him about that and to get educated about it. But that is directly toxic to the human brain. And so the longer somebody is on that substance, the more likely they go towards, I call it, they're hovering on the competency line. So maybe some days they're competent and they can participate if they were charged with something, but then other times they will be under the competency line, but eventually they will be under that competency line and they will never regain competency because of that long-term meth use. And we have people on that high utilizer criteria list that meet that, where we can see they started engaging in misdemeanor criminal activity back in 2016 and they were competent, and now we still are seeing them and they are incompetent because they have been left to linger on that substance, and now their brain will never recover. And we have given my kids and their generation a long-term care ticket for that person because he will not be able to self-care. And what have we done? And there's been multiple victims along the way while that deterioration has happened. That, to me, is a huge, long system fix we need to do, but it has to be known by the everyday person because that's the crux where all these things come together, with mental illness, with addiction and substance use disorders, and people being the victims of crime.
Do you think we understand the complexity of all of that, or have maybe this is a leading question, but it seems like that whole issue is kind of shorthanded in our community as homelessness or public safety issues. But what you just described is incredibly complex, and there's a bunch of different system failures and a bunch of different areas of public policy that are under-resourced. And there's not transparency to sort of where the fail points are, unless you're super close to it, like you are, and have kind of dug in.
I think that that's right. We have to have conversations about it so it feels like people could grasp what I'm describing. Because the natural tendency, again, is when you talk about somebody who is borderline not competent to understand what's happening to them, we all want to take a position of wanting to help. Nobody would want to do anything other than help the person. My uncle had schizophrenia, and he was a brilliant physics doctor in physics and whatnot, but he had to be on medication. And if he wasn't, he was paranoid about people trying to harm him. And so, of course, we want to help. But when there is harm done to others who are just, bystanders of that, we need to make sure we're understanding where it is. So we should not just go to I feel better about myself when I say we shouldn't do anything harmful to that person. And of course, we're not saying do something harmful, but when we avoid doing anything for the person, we actually are long-term harming that person's capability of getting some mental health care and creating more crime victims, likely creating more crime victims along the way. So it's necessary.
You mentioned drugs earlier, and a couple of weeks ago you stood up with Councilmember Peterson and Nelson to propose legislation to make drug use in public a misdemeanor. The state legislature has since acted and made it a gross misdemeanor, right? And you're still proposing legislation. You've modified it to sort of match what the state has done. Help people understand, one, why this action by the city is still necessary.
Right. So I'm going to talk to today's time because 2 weeks ago we weren't sure there was going to be any kind of a state legislative fix. And so that was 2 weeks ago, and we're past that. And so now we need to talk about today. So let's focus on today, which is we do have a legislative fix for state law. So we will not be in a place where there is decriminalization across the state for drug possession and drug use of controlled substances. And for the city, we are a charter city, and so things need to be put into our Seattle Municipal Code for them to be crimes within the city of Seattle. So other cities are structured differently. So when there's a state law fix, a lot of cities, that just happens automatically for them. For Seattle, we still have to adopt it within the Seattle Municipal Code, and then that creates the crime within the city of Seattle, and then that also grants the authority for me to prosecute under that. And when I use the word prosecute, that is not just you're charged and you go to court and there's a trial, et cetera. Prosecute means we have the ability to look at any type of diversionary things. We can do things pre-filing diversion. We can do pre-trial where there's a deferred prosecution. And we can do the thing that people are thinking about most when I say prosecution. All those things are part of that because we then can look at multiple systems to see what is going to be best for that situation. So we still need to have it in the Seattle Municipal Code in order for things to be addressed here in the city.
And and you addressed this to a degree, I mean, some have suggested, oh, here we go again. This is the war on drugs, and we're going to go arrest folks and lock them up. And these are folks who need treatment on a jail cell. How do you respond to those that have raised that concern, recognizing the state law was just adopted by overwhelmingly adopted by a democratically controlled Senate and House? But there are still some who will make that charge. And how do you respond? Yeah,
because before it was a felony, and then this 2-year time period, while it was held as our state law was unconstitutional, was a misdemeanor, and now the fix that has come out is called a gross misdemeanor. So it's the middle between those two levels. So for people to understand, and we've all evolved. I mean, my version of what the war on drugs probably was nobody paid attention to a person at all, and it was the criminalization wholeheartedly and just put them where we don't see them, and then when they're done with that time, they come out, and then that's it. We are nowhere near that. That is nowhere near what we're talking about. We are separating people from activity because we are saying crime is the activity that is occurring. We are not criminalizing mental illness. We are not criminalizing people. We're talking about activity that we've decided as a society. Our laws are a reflection of our values, and that's what that is. And in addition to that, when there does need to be in custody time, right, because that my office has recommended it, and a judge has also decided that, there should be in custody treatment that is robust and available, and that has not been a focus point, particularly at the misdemeanor level. In addition to, it is a full circle. In custody is never the goal, but if it does need to be appropriate for that circumstance, then the person needs to be better when they exit, and there needs to be a full, robust plan of reentry for that person, which is also not built out at the misdemeanor level. Again, that level of talk is usually at the felony level. People have been dismissive of it at the misdemeanor level, but if you talk about root causes, and you say we need to deal with root causes of crime, the closest you get to root causes is most likely when people are involved at the misdemeanor level. So this is actually where you can be instrumental. And changing the trajectory of somebody's life.
Before they go and commit
It's
a bunch of felonies.
Before it's serious. Why, as a society, do we want to wait until someone has just really gone way out of bounds as far as our societal norms to then make our systems work? We really should have this really robust, I've used that word 3 times with you. Sorry, I don't know why it's the word of the day for me, but strong and intuitive, right, and understanding of situations at the misdemeanor level, because I think that's the most responsive we can be with root causes at the closest proximity to it.
It seems too we're sort of missing the big key difference here between some of the drugs available in the 1980s and 90s and what is available today and the lethality. And if we had a bunch of people climbing to the top of the Space Needle every day and a handful jumping off to their death, as we do with overdose deaths here in the city, you'd think we would intervene as a community. But it feels like the lethality of these drugs is what is so new, which would, I think, compel most people to say, well, maybe the community and the city needs some mechanism of intervention here, because folks aren't going to walk into treatment or any other support service on their own.
It is true. Again, conferring with Dr. Reese as I have, because these are his patients. He treats people with serious addiction issues. And it's true that the more we can encourage the behavior we want, which is they need to accept themselves and we need to accept them. And we need to say, you're worth it, the effort early, not just later, but also early on. That's going to be the way to help save lives. Because to me, when you see someone on the street, I do get really emotional when I visualize people that we we walk by, and we all have this sense of helplessness of like, I don't know what to do in this moment.
What do you call? What do you do?
But you just know in your gut that it's not right. And you shouldn't just walk by, but you don't know what else to do. And you look around at all the other adults and they're also doing that. So then you put yourself in the minds of a child who's trying to read social cues. Well, I guess I ignore it too. We don't want a generation growing up thinking that's what they do. So we have to figure out a way to be responsive. And it doesn't mean that we are looking to punish and penalize an individual who's ended up there where social safety nets have failed repeatedly, or else they wouldn't be here. But we need to say, we see you, we hear your nonverbal communication loud and clear, because you're doing it out here in public in a way that is causing a lot of harm to yourself and also could be to others. Visually it is, but also maybe in the form of criminal activity to obtain the substances that now their body is so addicted to.
I like how you put it. We need to be responsive. I think that's a good way to phrase it.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time talking about your current job. We're going to debut a new question on Seattle City Makers with you. What was your first job where you had like taxes withdrawn from your paycheck? Not like under the table job, but like first job.
I mean, like a full-time job or like the babysitting gigs and stuff, right? Like the first full-time job, like out of college, post-college jobs and stuff. Well, it's going to sound boring because it was also in government, oddly enough. It was in D.C. I was a caseworker handling military casework. Constituents would write in or about their Social Security or their Medicare and Medicaid, and I would just help
helping
problem
people
solve
navigate government.
Giant administrative agencies for their small problem. I didn't know the representative, wasn't even from my state. I just needed a job, moved to D.C. I was trying to get a job with an NGO to get overseas. I wanted to work in Southeast Asia, specifically in Cambodia. And do crisis relief work. So I was like, well, I'll head to DC and maybe I can get a job there. So I worked there for 1 year. That person retired, and then I moved to Thailand to teach English and try to get the job I wanted over there.
And then you ended up in the front office of the Seattle Supersonics, between 1997 and 2001? 96.
The year we went to the NBA Finals.
The Chicago Bulls, yes. So 96 to 2001. How did you end up there? And then, given your time in the front office, do you have any insights on when you think we might land a team here in Seattle?
I know. If I can't afford to buy one myself, that's too bad. So from Southeast Asia to pro sports is a little funny. I think having the privileges I've had between, my birth mother giving me up for adoption and my parents giving me a stable home, lots of education, I had the ability to dream and have my life's work intertwine with what I felt as a sense of purpose for myself. Not everybody gets that that beautiful choice in life to have their work be part of also what they think is important in the world. And so I really wanted that always to be part of my work, is where can I give back because I have ability and access to education and use that. So I came back from Southeast Asia because it wasn't working out and needed another job, and I landed in pro sports at a sports agency in DC, working with tennis clients and doing all kinds of things like that, sports marketing. And through that, ended up deciding I wasn't East Coast speed, and I didn't want to return to Texas. So I thought, well, I guess we're going west. And so I left December 1st, 1995, drove across the country to Seattle, sight unseen, to move, and wore my sunglasses every day on my long drive across the country. Left and snowed in at DC, and I arrived here on one of these glorious cold days we have in Seattle where you can see all the mountains. And I thought, wow, I think I just landed in the awesomest spot possible. And so had lined up that interview with the Sonics and landed that job and lived on a houseboat on Lake Union, and joined in January of 96, and 6 months later, flying with the team to Chicago on the team plane. I'm like, I pretty much think I've arrived in the best place ever.
Nailed it.
So I went from wanting to work with refugees to really helping professional athletes, basketball players. So it was still kind of a form of helping, but it's just a different type of person. But they're often people that are sought after, for what they can give, and are not thought of often as a person who sometimes needs, someone they can trust. Mm-hmm. And so I was just more of an invisible person, but a trusted person that they knew they could rely on. Same with the coaches. And so many of them are still my friends, and it's pretty great.
So we saw each other at the Blazers-Clippers preseason game at Climate Pledge. When was that, September? What was that like for you? I felt that whole night.
I had to call one of my friends who works for the Blazers. Can you give me a ticket? I need to go.
And you had your Sonic
I did wear my
on.
Sonic stuff. Yeah. It's like a dream because the building I worked in, the practice facility, has been torn down.
Yeah.
It now has the Gates Foundation. The team sold, and I just took my kids down to see their first NBA game, and it was the Blazers against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But I wore Sonics gear. And so it's like they're gone, and it's like, did that all really happen? Like, was it really like that? And it really was. So I guess I never think about myself as an optimist, but I guess if you think about my doggedness on trying to help problems here locally, I guess I am kind of a glasses half full type of person. So I'm going to keep my hopeful optimism and think the team will come back. Because I tell you, when I door knocked, which I love doing, and wore my Sonics hat, so many people were like, yes, yes. And from like kids to older adults to everywhere in between, it just brought a sense of happiness. So for the not to be a team and everyone still to love the name and love the colors and want it, even past people that knew them when they were here, it needs to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if the NBA needed a lot of convincing that night at Climate Pledge, but it was a good show and a great turnout.
It's a good show. Yeah, I'm trying to improve, just the general sense of what the city's like. So, this is the market we need to have them in, sure.
Have you embraced the Kraken? Were you a hockey fan before? Are you a hockey fan now?
I am mesmerized with hockey. I have so much admiration. I'm a soccer player, so I don't even really know much about the sport of basketball. I just know how to help run the business of basketball. But I knew the call for illegal defense, and then they took that away. So I was like, no, that's the one ref call. I know what that is. And so I know about hockey, and I don't know how they do what they do in hockey, but this is where my Texas roots do show. I get so cold that I just have not been able to go in person. I have to watch it on TV.
It is chilly down there, especially at the lower level.
Yeah.
So our closing question is your perfect Saturday in the city of Seattle. What are you doing? How are you spending your perfect Saturday? You get to pick the season and what the weather's like. And then, what's your itinerary?
And then you have to tell us, how do you start Mondays that you like? It's definitely the summertime because, again, growing up in Texas and then living in in Thailand. I've dealt with the heat and I know what it's like, and I've lived with no air conditioning in some of those places. And so a summer here is just amazing. So when people do complain about how hot it is, sometimes I think, well, it's going to be so cool at 5 a.m. tomorrow. So my Saturday would not start at 5 a.m. though, but it would start early. It would be a long run or a great CrossFit workout with my gym. My kids sleeping in so that there's not like breakfast needs at the moment. It would be with a clean kitchen for sure, and me not making dinner, and probably hitting a live music venue later. One of the small ones to see some.
What's your genre of music you like?
It's all the alternatives, kind of the newer, whatever's kind of not really known. My place is always to go.
Give me an artist.
Well, my all-time favorite is not local, and they're old and whatever. But I did fly my kids to go see them in Australia because they're my favorite band, Midnight Oil. They only right because they don't sing any love songs. There's no sappy. They only sing about political things and environmental songs, and so their lyrics are great for kids to learn, and they can learn history all at the same time. The lead singer was a lawyer and actually was in office. He was one of the ministers of the Australian government for a period of time. So go figure. Yeah.
That sounds like a great day.
It would be great. Yes.
Do you still have the housebot?
No, I was a tenant. I rented
gotcha.
that. I rented that. Yeah. So now I'm a North Ender.
Yeah.
But I've always lived in the city for the 25 years, all different neighborhoods. Loved it. And really want it to be able to be walkable and safe and beautiful. I think beauty, I'm a function person. I'm not really about like aesthetics, but there is something about a place that you see is cared for compared to a place that feels neglected. And when you see that a place feels cared for, I think it makes us all humanly think, oh, well, I need to kind of sit up a little straighter and kind of act like a little bit better behavior instead of the place that doesn't. I think it makes us feel like, well, why should I bother doing whatever it is? And we just want to always fend off the why should I bother mentality, right? We need to just push that away, and be like, it does matter if I pitch in. It does matter.
I think there's some science behind it. Our last, most recent episode was with Dan Biederman, who turned around Bryant Park in New York City in the 1980s and 90s. And since that time, they've put flowers in their bathrooms in Bryant Park. For that same reason, right? To elevate the standard of beauty and the expectation of, hey, treat it like a nice place.
Yes.
And he's turned that into a gold standard of urban parks around the country and world. So
the Scout motto, leave it better than you found it.
That's right.
Thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you for making time for this. I know you're busy.
You do a great job.
We have fun here, and we appreciate you making time for it and for what you're doing. It's not an easy job. We're glad you made the decision to run, and certainly the downtown community. But I think all of Seattle is really grateful and appreciative of your leadership, and we look forward to you chipping away at some of these challenges.
I'm thankful and happy that I actually loved the substantive days of the work. And the work, I just didn't know if I would or not. It wasn't even a question. I just knew I had to do it. But that's an extra personal piece that I really love the work, and it makes me just immensely happy every day. It doesn't even feel like work. So that's a great added bonus.
That's the way it should be, right?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ann.
Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Seattle City Attorney Ann Davison. Appreciate Ann for making time to come on the podcast and for all the work she and her team are doing to take on some very tough issues in the city of Seattle and make Seattle a safer, more welcoming place for all of us. And of course, there's a large civil division of the city attorney's office that we didn't talk too much about, but an important aspect of that office in representing the city's interests and the public interests in a host of matters that come before city government. But appreciate Ann for her public service and for making time to join us on Seattle City Makers. I want to close out with a regular feature here of our podcast, the Don't Miss, Can't Miss, what you just got to come down and see in downtown Seattle. This could be something that has recently reopened, something that is new, or something that is on its way to downtown. And for this episode, I want to highlight the new location of Skillet, the great restaurant that started in Seattle, got a number of locations throughout the city. And they're opening a new spot in downtown, right off of Harbor Steps there on Post Alley between First and Western. And it's got a great big heated patio, indoor dining, a walk-up window. I've been watching this thing be under construction for the last couple of months. I didn't quite know what it was, but their sign just went up a couple of weeks ago. And so now we know. Skillet opening a new location just off Harbor Steps in downtown Seattle. It looks terrific. So great burgers, milkshakes, fries. They do it right. Go check out Skillet down at Harbor Steps. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association, with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.